Welcome to the program, Professor William Jacobson, who runs an outstanding website, legalinsurrection.com. Bill, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Now, you've really written an excellent piece here, which kind of started the ball rolling, on the Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, not the Attorney General of the United States. And what is the gist of this piece that you think is really quite significant?
Right. Well, it was just announced that Rod Rosenstein on August 2 of 2017 had confirmed with Robert Mueller that Mueller's investigation and appointment included things related to Paul Manafort, the former campaign person for Trump, who was there for a relatively short time. And Manafort, of course, has been indicted and is being prosecuted by Mueller for things that have nothing to do with the campaign, nothing to do with Russian collusion, nothing to do with any of those. And then I thought about it, and that's being used, that August 2 memo, to sort of justify what Mueller has been doing. Because a lot of people, I've been doing it, I think you probably share the view, are concerned that Mueller has run amok, that he's just essentially roving the landscape looking for a crime instead of sticking to what he was appointed. And his original appointment on May 17 was very clear that it related to the investigation of alleged Russian collusion and Russian interference in the campaign. So everyone's wondering, why is he going after Paul Manafort for things that happened several years ago, long before the campaign, that have nothing to do with the campaign? Why is he doing this? And people say, well, he was authorized by Rod Rosenstein on August 2. And then I thought about it, and I said, wait a second. By August 2 of 2017, Robert Mueller's team was already going after Paul Manafort. In fact, I looked it up. I didn't remember the date. A week before that, they had raided Manafort's home unannounced, I think at 5 in the morning, to seize documents. And I looked it up, and that happened on July 26th. So the whole thing, I think, paints a very troubling picture. And the troubling picture is that Robert Mueller has decided to go after somebody, an American citizen who's entitled to whatever rights he's entitled to under essentially pretenses of authority that are highly questionable. And in my article at my website, I go through fairly methodically what the appointment was, how it was limited, and how it does not include things unrelated to the campaign or unrelated to Russia collusion. And so this paints a picture that's very troubling of a special prosecutor who has decided that he is going to go after crimes that have nothing to do with the reason why he was appointed. And of course, we've seen other people who he has indicted and convicted for the same thing. Mike Flynn. Mike Flynn was convicted of allegedly lying about, or he pled guilty to lying about conversations that took place after the election during the transition period. And this just goes to the whole issue of what is going on with this Robert Mueller investigation, and have there been appropriate restraints put on him?
Now, this is, I think, essential, the point you're making. And after the fact, then, he gets his original appointment in May, as you write, May 17th. He gets his appointment order from the Deputy Attorney General, who for only this purpose is the acting Attorney General, only for the purpose in which the actual Attorney General has recused himself. He has no authority to grab authority beyond Sessions' recusal. Isn't that correct?
That's right. Rosenstein is only operating in the areas to which Jeff Sessions recused himself, which has to do with campaign-related investigations. Jeff Sessions has not recused himself with regard to things that people did several years before the campaign and had nothing to do with the campaign.
And Jeff Sessions has not conferred and cannot confer the authority of the Attorney General on the Deputy Attorney General, and the Deputy Attorney General does not have the power to seize it. And yet, to be perfectly blunt about it, it would appear to be the case. Let me make the point based on what you've written. So, on May 17th, the Deputy Attorney General, acting as the Attorney General because Sessions recused himself, appoints Mueller, gives him his marching orders. Then, after Mueller has already gone well beyond his marching orders, he's gone outside the box by going into Manafort's home as you say, 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. His wife and he are in bed. The FBI has their guns drawn. They have a warrant. They spend 10 hours there, apparently, collecting his suits and his information and his computers and so forth. Then a week later or so, then Rod Rosenstein, the acting attorney general, deputy attorney general, only for the purposes of the campaign, expands Mueller's authority to include what Mueller already did.
Well, in some ways it's worse than that, because if you read this Rosenstein memo, and it's posted on my website, he acts like this was part of the original authority.
Mm-hmm.
But why would you have to go to him to get this create this paper justification if it was already part of your authority? You would
3 months later.
That's
3
right.
months later, you're right. He writes
so
this document to cover.
If Mueller thought he had the authority to do these things, he wouldn't, after the fact, have to go to Rosenstein and essentially say, create a piece of paper which justifies what I've already done. It's like that thing where people say it's easier to get forgiveness than permission.
All right, Professor Jacobson, I want you to hold on if you can. I want to pursue this a couple of more steps. We'll be right back. I want to get back to Professor William Jacobson. Now, we have a federal judge. The Manafort lawyers, I think, have made a very strong case. And the federal judge all but told them the other day that what they were doing was utterly frivolous. She was disgusted by it. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess that argument in court, there's been no ruling yet, but I only know the news reports of what happened, and the news reports are that the Manafort team, and just so your listeners understand, what he did is he commenced a civil lawsuit to try to get a judge to halt the Mueller investigation and to rule that the Mueller was improperly appointed. Apparently, and that was always going to be a long shot to go in an action rather than bringing that up in the criminal case. And he's brought that up in the criminal case, and there's no ruling yet. But in the civil case, apparently the judge was fairly dismissive of it, and apparently Manafort's, according to these news reports, lawyers backed away from a lot of it. It was a very tough claim that he brought in civil court, in federal court, but a civil case. What's before the court in his criminal case are essentially the same arguments, but a very different procedural posture. So they'll get a ruling. I don't think anybody expects that he will get the charges against him dismissed on the ground that Mueller was improperly appointed. I just don't think a lot of people are expecting that. So there's not a lot of high hope that he'll get out of this. But I think the important thing is this issue of Rosenstein essentially retroactively giving Mueller authority to go after Manafort should be very frightening to people, because, in our system of justice, you find a crime first, and then you try to prove that someone was responsible for it. Mueller has it completely backwards. He was appointed without a finding that there was a crime, which was probably improper to begin with, and he's got targets, whether he calls them legal targets or not. He's got people he's focusing on, namely Donald Trump and the people around him, and he's going out trying to find crimes. That's not the way it's supposed to happen.
No, but you know what? The Attorney General of the United States has the power, outside of his recusal, to take back this subject area from the special counsel. There's no question about it. He can say, you know what, Mr. Deputy Attorney General, I'm the Attorney General, and for purposes of matters unrelated to the campaign, to Russian collusion and all the rest of it, we'll keep that in-house. And he can transfer the case to the public integrity section of the criminal division. He can transfer it to the U.S. Attorney in D.C. or Virginia, because they brought cases in both courts. He doesn't have to sit back and watch this, right?
That's right, and that's a very important point, because Manafort is being prosecuted for things that have nothing to do with the so-called supposed Russian collusion or campaign interference. These are subject areas that straight career prosecutors at DOJ in whatever the appropriate division is could have prosecuted. I mean, it's money laundering, it's tax violations, it's reporting violations. There is no reason that Robert Mueller needs to be doing this other than the fact that Paul Manafort had the misfortune of associating himself for a very short period of time with Donald Trump in 2016. If Paul Manafort had not done that, he would not be prosecuted right now by Robert Mueller. Who knows if he'd be prosecuted at all? And people may like Paul Manafort or they may not like him as a character, but he's entitled to be treated fairly. And having a special prosecutor put on him to go through his life to try to find crimes that he's done that have nothing to do with why the special counsel, not special prosecutor, why the special counsel was appointed is very frightening. It's not supposed to be happening, and I agree with you that on issues unrelated to the purpose for which Robert Mueller was appointed, Jeff Sessions should take this away from him, because there's no reason Paul Manafort should be prosecuted for several-year-old money laundering alleged violations by Robert Mueller.
Well, I have you here. I want to play an audio, Mr. Producer, what Trey Gowdy had to say on CNN today, which I strongly disagree with. We had a federal criminal defense lawyer who agrees with me, and most lawyers do. But you may not. I want you to listen to what Trey Gowdy had to say on CNN today. Cut 6, go.
I do think he should sit down with Special Counsel Mueller. I think he's uniquely well positioned to answer some of the questions that not just Special Counsel, but also the American people have. I don't think those terms, target versus subject, the only word that matters to me in the criminal justice system is defendant. So if you're not a defendant, whether you're the target or whether you're the subject, I know the FBI gets really caught up in those two words. As a former federal prosecutor, they're meaningless to me, because one witness can take you from being a subject to a target. And unless and until you've interviewed everyone and looked at everything, no one has been implicated and no one has been exculpated. So those words, I read the articles and I just kind of smile because it's meaningless to me.
Isn't it risky for the president to sit down with Mueller's team?
Do I think he will?
No, isn't it risky?
Only he knows what he knows. So I would tell you, if you did not rob the bank, there's no reason for you not to sit down and talk to the FBI about the bank robbery. So only he knows what he knows. He's been adamant that his campaign did not collude with anyone, including other segments of his campaign, to get out the vote in certain states. So if you've done nothing wrong, I know I'm in the minority. Most of the so-called legal experts are telling him not to do it. If you have nothing to hide, sit down, assuming a fair prosecutor, and I think Mueller is, sit down and tell him what you know.
No, Professor, I find this to be almost absurd. No, in fact, it is absurd.
I agree with you completely.
Go ahead, Professor.
I mean, you got to understand that Donald Trump could go into an interview with Robert Mueller and tell the truth to the best of his recollection. But if he forgets something, if he gets something wrong, if he misremembers, if he forgets to add information, he'll find himself like Scooter Libby did, or, charged with the so-called process crime. So if Robert Mueller, there's no information that Robert Mueller needs that is uniquely within the possession of Donald Trump. Robert Mueller has interviewed dozens and dozens of people throughout the White House. I think practically the entire White House staff and campaign has been interviewed. They've had their records subpoenaed. There probably is a lot. Their emails are probably all in Mueller's possession. Their text messages, everything. There is nothing, zero, that Donald Trump can tell Robert Mueller that Robert Mueller does not have another source for. And if there was such a pearl of information, it could be done by written questions. It does not need to be face-to-face. Because let's face it, Donald Trump is somebody who shoots from the hip. He's not going to worry very much about precise wording. So you can get yourself in trouble criminally with an overzealous prosecutor, even if you want to tell the truth, but if you do something which they will call obstruction of justice. It would be insane for Donald Trump voluntarily to sit down and have a verbal interview with Robert Mueller's team. I mean, Robert Mueller has put together a team of 13, 14, 15, however many lawyers. They are not there to walk away from this with some petty convictions of Paul Manafort and a couple of other people and Michael Flynn. If that's all they get from this, then Mueller will be considered a failure from the people who want Trump prosecuted. He is there for one reason and one reason only, to catch Donald Trump in something. Trump would be crazy if he goes in to a verbal back and forth with Mueller where the slightest slip of a tongue could be used to claim obstruction of justice or some other process crime.
That's so brilliantly put. And, of course, Mueller and his prosecutors, as you point out, know far more than Trump does. Trump was the candidate. It's not like he was involved in all the particulars. So you could have somebody like this Papadopoulos saying, I met with him, I spoke to him, I did this, that, or the other, and Trump can say, well, I don't remember. They could say, well, I have a video of this, I have this or that. They could twist that, as you're pointing out, and all of a sudden, his back's against the wall.
That's right, and there is no reason for him to be sitting down. And if I were his counsel, I would tell him, do not do that. If Robert Mueller thinks he has the legal authority to force Donald Trump to sit down with him and answer questions verbally, then let him go to court and get a court ruling to that effect, and appeal it and take it up to the Supreme Court if need be. So if you're forced to do it, of course you comply with, what ultimately the Supreme Court says you have to do. But do not do it voluntarily. And I really hope Donald Trump will not think he can talk his way out of this, not fall for, I generally speaking like Trey Gowdy, but he's so wrong on this one that you will never convince a prosecutor who's out to get you that you're innocent just by going in and thinking you can talk your way out of it and they'll be nice to you. There's no reason to expect that this will happen. I mean, look what they did to Paul Manafort. There was no reason for them to have raided his home in the early hours of the morning like that. There are people on Mueller's staff who are known for being extraordinarily aggressive in their prosecutions and have been had cases thrown out when that came out. So Donald Trump has to understand that whatever and verbiage Mueller's office wants to use, whether it's subject or target, he is the target. He is the person that Robert Mueller wants to get. And if Robert Mueller has proof of collusion, assuming it's even criminal. I mean, mere collusion may be bad politically, but it's not necessarily criminal. If Robert Mueller, from all his wiretaps and his intercepts and his subpoenas and his raids, if he's got the information on Trump, he doesn't need Trump's interview for it. And if he doesn't have the information, the only reason he wants Trump to sit down and verbally spar with him is to catch Trump in something. And
let me underscore this point. I can't even think of a crime that Donald Trump committed or might have committed under these circumstances. Not one. Not one. So the only reason for him, for the prosecutor to have him sit down is to catch him in one of these process deals, right?
Exactly, because, again, he could honestly not remember something, and then it gets twisted around.
Like Flynn, like General Flynn.
Like Flynn, that's right, and like Scooter Libby. Or he could say something in a way which in his mind sounds accurate but might not be technically accurate. That happens to all of us. We make statements and we make comments, and then we remember something later on that maybe says, oh, I should have been more precise on that.
Plus, Professor, this guy's already said, the prosecutor, he wants to do something rather extraordinary. He wants to do a report. Not a prosecutor's report to the deputy, a report, and they said in the leak in the Washington Post that it might in fact suggest that the president obstructed justice. Okay. Now, the guy's going to do a report. Even more of a reason not to sit down with him.
Again, there is nothing that Robert Mueller needs from Donald Trump other than to, in a sense, use that interview to create a crime. To create a crime where someone forgets something or they misstate something. We're all human. It happens.
Okay.
But but particularly with someone like Donald Trump, who is a politician now, is a showman in most of his career, he will say things that are not precise, and for most people that would be okay. But in
I've got to run. This has been excellent, these two segments with you, Bill, and I want to thank you and tell people where to find you.
Sure, you can reach us at legalinsurrection.com. Just search Legal Insurrection on Google, and I'm sure you'll find us if they haven't wiped us off the Google search yet.
Okay. Well, God bless. Thank you very, very much.